Hey everyone and welcome. Today we're diving into a really fascinating passage from the Quran's second chapter, Al-Baqarah. In just 11 verses, it lays out a whole framework for two things that seem like polar opposites, the ethics of defensive war and the unifying rituals of pilgrimage. So let's see how it connects these two worlds.
So this is really the big question we're tackling. How does a text like this shift so smoothly from talking about conflict to talking about peace? It's a pretty powerful contrast, and it shows us this deep, integrated worldview where justice and unity are really just two sides of the very same coin.
All right, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at the principles of defense, the why and the how. Then we'll pivot completely over to the Hajj pilgrimage, digging into its rules, its spiritual core, and its incredible message of unity. And finally, we'll see how it all ties together in a prayer for a balanced life.
Okay, first up, the purpose of conflict. Now, it's really important to get this straight from the beginning. The Quran isn't talking about aggression here, not at all. Instead, it's setting the stage for why a community might need to defend itself, and the really strict conditions for when that defense is even allowed.
This verse right here is foundational. It sets the one and only objective for any kind of permitted conflict. But to really get what it's saying, we've got to unpack a key Arabic term, fitna.
So the word is fitna. In this context, it doesn't just mean chaos or trouble. It's much more specific. It means religious persecution, when people are being oppressed or pressured so much that they can't practice their faith freely. So the goal isn't conquest, and it's not about forced conversion. The goal is to establish religious freedom. Think about that for a second. What a truly radical idea for its time. And you can't just skip over this second half of the verse. It is absolutely crucial. It establishes this principle of individual accountability. See, hostility isn't aimed at a whole group or a tribe or a nation. No, it's directed only at the specific people who are actively doing the oppressing. The second that oppression stops, the fighting has to stop, period.
Okay, so if the why is to end persecution, what about the how? Well, that brings us to our next big theme, the strict ethical guardrails that are placed on any kind of defensive action.
This verse brings in a really powerful principle, reciprocity. It's all about making sure that any response is just and proportional, ensuring that self-defense doesn't just spiral into unchecked aggression.
So back in pre-Islamic Arabia, there were certain months that were considered sacred. You just didn't fight during them. What this verse is saying is that while that sacredness should be honored, it can't be used as a weapon. If an aggressor decides to attack during a sacred month, the community has every right to defend itself. The permission to fight is directly tied to what the other side does first.
And this isn't just a one-off idea, The Quran is super consistent on this. Here, in a totally different chapter, Surah An-Nahl, you see the exact same principle. Any response has to be equivalent to the harm that was done to you. It's a crystal clear rule against escalating things or using disproportionate force. Now we get to a verse that is very, very often misunderstood. That phrase, do not throw yourselves with your own hands into destruction. It sounds pretty straightforward, right? But what it actually means in its Quranic context is probably not what you think. So the common take is that this is a warning against going to war. But within the actual flow of these verses, it means the complete opposite. The real destruction, the verse is arguing, comes from being stingy, from failing to contribute and fund the community's collective defense, which leaves everyone weak and totally vulnerable to attack. And right here, the passage makes this remarkable shift. After laying out all the principles for defending the community from outside threats, the Quran immediately pivots to the ultimate ritual for unifying that same community from within, the Hajj pilgrimage.
So verse 196 gets right into the nuts and bolts, the practical framework for the Hajj. It covers everything from the intention you have in your heart to what you should do if you're physically blocked from finishing it. It's this really fascinating mix of high spiritual ideals and down-to-earth practical logistics.
Okay, so once the practical rules are set, the Quran immediately takes the conversation to a higher level, to the spiritual and ethical state of the pilgrim. It sets this clear code of conduct, no arguing, no sinfulness. And then it offers this incredibly profound piece of advice about how to prepare for this journey. The verse says, the best provision is taqwa. Taqwa is such a central concept in Islam. It's often translated as God consciousness or piety. The message here is so clear. Sure, pack your food and your water for the physical trip, but don't you dare forget your spiritual provision. Your awareness of God, that's what will truly get you through.
But the Hajj isn't just about an individual's spiritual journey.
The Quran presents it as something else, something, well, revolutionary for its time, a radical act of social leveling.
Now, this verse might seem pretty simple on the surface, but wow, it was a direct hit against the class system of 7th century Mecca. That command to depart from the place where the people depart was a direct takedown of aristocratic privilege.
To really feel the punch of this verse, you gotta know the backstory. See, before Islam, the elite tribe of Quraysh thought they were better than everyone else. They called themselves the Hums. And during the Hajj, they would refuse to stand with the regular folks at the plain of Arafat. They had their own special separate spot. This verse just demolishes that privilege. It commands everyone, the elite, the commoner, everybody, to follow the exact same route and stand in the exact same place together. It's an explicit command for absolute equality before God. No exceptions.
And all of this brings us to the culmination of the passage. After all the rites are done, the Quran turns to the mindset of the pilgrim, presenting a model for how a believer should look at their life as a whole.
The Quran shows us two types of people, defined by what they pray for. The first type is completely materialistic. They're only focused on worldly success. And the Quran's judgment on that is pretty stark. They get no share in the next life. But the second type, they seek a holistic good. They pray for a good, flourishing life in this world and in the next. And that is the balanced ideal that the Quran champions.
And here it is. This is that famous prayer, Rabbana Atina Fid Dunya Hasana. It's recited by millions of Muslims all over the world, and it's just the perfect summary of this balanced worldview. It says no to an asceticism that denies the world, but it also says no to a materialism that forgets the hereafter. It asks for the best of both worlds.
And the passage wraps up with these final instructions for the days right after the main Hajj rites. It stresses remembering God, but look, it also shows this beautiful flexibility. You can hurry or you can delay. This just highlights that even inside a structured ritual, there's still room for ease and for mercy, and it's all tied back to that central theme of taqwa, or God consciousness. And that brings us to the end. From the strict ethics of a just defense to the radical equality of a unified pilgrimage, these verses from Surah Al-Baqarah offer such a profound vision. It really leaves us with a question to think about. In our own lives and in our societies, which are so often pulled toward extremes, how can we apply this timeless call for justice, for balance, and for unity?